Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Cash That. This is your host, Joe Delara, and this episode is once again brought to you by our good friends at Rhythm. Rhythm is the #1 AI betting tool in the market. You can get it for the NBA as the season winds down, Major League Baseball. We've even got the WNBA in there, and if you're like me, you know that you're going to want to get some action on all that hoop throughout the course of the summer. So you can get it on your phone, on your computer, wherever you want it to have access to the best plays and the best models at your fingertips at any point in time that you want for a week for free on me right down here. And then if you come back, you like it next week, 25% off your first month. Again, guys, this episode and everything that I do here really wouldn't be possible if I didn't have the support that you guys all give me. And if you aren't a follower or a subscriber, make sure you subscribe, give us a comment. That's definitely what helps us continue to give you this good content. And when I say us, I mean me. And that's because that's really how this goes. But right now, I am a little sad. New York Knicks just dropped another winnable game. They go down 3-1. Tough scenario here. It's tough when I think game one was obviously winnable. Game one, they probably should have. They should have won. The Pacers, it was a record-setting win, right? And then game two was it within reach. Game three, they win, and then game four, realistically they were never that close. It felt close at times, but the Pacers always were able to keep them at least a couple possessions away. And the whistle was not good. I don't think anybody is debating that. I think it's particularly telling when Reggie Miller is even saying the whistle is bad because he's not the most unbiased in the box. He's about as unbiased as I am, except the other way. So I think that's notable. But at the same time, the Knicks that's not why they lost per se. You have those stretches at the end of the first half and the start of the second half would have amounted to a 13-0 run. You continue to run these lineups that don't make sense. They don't really fit together right. There's not as many in-game adjustments, and it just is a little problematic overall from a process perspective. So, that's the way it is sometimes in the NBA. You lose games that you should win, but over the course of the regular season, you can kind of make up for that. In the playoffs, it's much, much more difficult. So they really got their work cut out for them. They're obviously going to go back to the Garden for game 5, where, maybe they can force a game 6 in Indiana. We'll see what happens. Obviously, one of the things they kind of kept talking about on the broadcast was, these leagues aren't the same. Anybody can kind of win these games, and, you can continue to force a longer series, but it becomes more difficult. The margins become a lot narrower, and it's very, very difficult to win. You got to give Tyrese Haliburton his flowers, though. What a fucking performance from him today. Literally another record-setting performance, 30, 10, and 15. No turnovers. Just the first time anybody's ever done that in a playoff setting. Just absolutely incredible performance from Tyrese Haliburton. His dad's back there, and, it does show that there's a stark difference in terms of the offenses, right? And one of the criticisms of the Pacers, which makes sense though when you have a guy like Haliburton, is the offense gets stagnant when Haliburton isn't dominant on the offensive side of the ball. And that makes sense. He's an elite facilitator of an offense. So it completely checks out that the offense gets a little bit stuck in the mud if he's not having a good game, if he's struggling to score, because his scoring does tend to open up things for everybody else. Incredible performance from him. It seems pretty likely, given that the two series are both 3-1, that we're going to wind up seeing the Thunder against the Pacers. And, the Thunder are obviously an interesting matchup for Indiana. I think they stylistically kind of match up against each other, especially from a personnel perspective, given Oklahoma City's length, athleticism, their depth as well. And then Indiana, they play this run and gun kind of style of offense, and they also generate a good amount of turnovers. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see, I think, that dichotomy play out. I mean, Indiana is going to probably be the toughest test that Oklahoma City's had to face. Obviously, you have Jokic and that Nuggets team, which, you have the best player in the world in Jokic. But at the same time, the team surrounding Jokic, I think you could make an argument that it's not as good as Indiana's team surrounding Tyrese Haliburton. And the coaching especially, I think Adelman's obviously fine. He did a good job. He got hired, but Rick Carlisle has put on a clinic in this series. And I think that Carlisle would be a distinct stylistic advantage and coaching advantage over Dagnall for the Thunder. So I don't want to get too into the weeds with that, but because I'll obviously have a preview podcast for the finals when we get there, but I think from an actionable perspective, right, for the next couple of games, looking at New York, very tough spot to be in. Karl Anthony Towns does not, like, that knee didn't look great. He played great again, I think, like, relatively. The defense seemed to hold up okay, but again, you run into this situation where there's a lot of like give and take, give and take, give and take, your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn. And I think that has become a little bit of a problem for New York's offense in this series in particular. He didn't shoot any, like, really any threes today. He was only 1 for 2 from beyond the arc. I think it's a good thing in a way because he is trying to capitalize on his size and athleticism. But now, given the knee, it makes you wonder, are they going to be able to do that? Is he going to be able to do that moving forward to really kind of cement himself within this New York offense a little bit more in terms of that role, in terms of continuing to attack, continue to get to the free throw line, forcing fouls? I don't know if he's necessarily going to be able to do that. If he can't do that, then that means there's even more of a weight on Jalen Brunson, probably more doubles that get thrown at him. And that is going to be something to monitor as game 5 kind of progresses. So for game 5, I might be looking at a little bit of a Brunson PA type of look, or maybe even just an assist look in the Towns. If he's not at 100%, they're going to be able to help off of him a little bit. They're going to be able to kind of shade a little bit more towards Jalen Brunson. So definitely interesting. I also thought there was an interesting live betting opportunity in this game. It's hard to, you can't really give them out in the same way, but it's something that you can kind of look for. So in the third quarter, you could tell immediately that the Knicks were kind of getting into the bonus. They were getting a lot more opportunities there. And what you were able to do was you could, I like on FanDuel, they have some of those bets where it's like player to score X amount of points in the third quarter. I think a lot of times those are sucker bets because people don't necessarily know what the rotations are of the players. So, you'll put a bet in on somebody to score, say, 10 points in the third quarter, but their rotation has them only playing about 6 minutes or 7 minutes in the third quarter as opposed to the full third quarter. For guys like Brunson generally plays about like 10 to 12, depending on the game or the situation, right? So when I saw that the New York was kind of getting that whistle a little bit, like in terms of the fact that they were in foul trouble, right? Or the Pacers were in foul trouble and they were in the bonus. I was like, all right, well now every time Brunson drives, he is going to get to the free throw line. And then they pulled Nesmith for a little bit. So I bet Brunson to score 10 and 12 points in the quarter at like plus 240 and plus 1200. And those both wound up hitting in large part because I was like, well, they pulled Nesmith. So now Brunson's going to get to attack either Shepherd or Nembhard, which has worked very well for him. And then even if they put Nesmith back in, he's going to be able to generate some fouls. He's going to be able to generate some contact, probably get to the free throw line anyway. So that bet hit, and I was happy about that live betting opportunity. So it's something that you guys can kind of look for if you can see maybe the whistle's going one way, or there's an opportunistic situation here where, a player generally is able to draw fouls, but then the team happens to be in the bonus even a little bit earlier. So some shots that they might go, oh, well, that was really on the floor. It wasn't a shooting attempt. Then it doesn't really matter anymore. So for guys like Shay, guys like Brunson, that's definitely something you kind of look for. Even Ant, to a degree, you could even look to that to say like, okay, well, this team's in the bonus. They're going to get a couple extra opportunities to get to the free throw line. And they're players that aren't shying away from contact, and they are trying to get you in the air, generate opportunities, and drive to the paint, because that's generally where you're going to get those free throw chances. All right, so let's talk about the Minnesota and Oklahoma City series for a little bit before I get you guys out of here. I think I want to make this a little bit of a shorter episode, just based on where we are in these series. Ant came out a little flat last game. I think that he still had like a decent game, but at the same time, I think a big part of it was Oklahoma City basically just said, we don't think anybody else can run this offense besides you. And you don't have another creator that is good enough to supplement the offense. And as a result, they just overloaded on it. 16 points, 6 dimes, couldn't really get any rebounds either. So it seemed like a relatively passive performance. However, I do think that he was able to be effective still in running the offense. And like, if we look at the game, Minnesota was still pretty close. So I think it still kind of worked for them. They were able to get the role players involved. They were able to generate some extra opportunities. They were able to create offense when both Anthony Edwards and Julius Randle had relatively ineffective scoring games, right? So let's think about it. When Ant's a guy that has like he plays with that attitude, he plays with his emotions on his sleeve, and he's a killer. That's what he is. Do we think that he's going to have another game like that? I don't I don't think so. And I think in large part it's going to be because he gets so much more aggressive in these second games where the next game rather where he's relatively shut down offensively. And I think that aggression comes through in both scoring and in rebounding. So I think I might be looking at a PR opportunity here for Ant. Let's see what his line is right real quick. So Ant, his points line's at 26 and a half. His PR line is at 34 and a half. I'm seeing mostly. And his rebound line is at, there's mostly 7.5s in the market at plus money now. So we are seeing a little bit of a uptick from there. I think it opened at 6.5, but I'm cool. Sometimes I'm cool with waiting. You can't get enough down. It's not good content, honestly. And it just puts you in a situation where I'm giving out a line that like most people can't even bet, or like, a lot of people aren't looking to bet props on the next game, like before there's a game that day. So I do try to keep it that way from a content perspective, so we can try to bet and win, sometimes even on closing lines. Sometimes we have to grab an opener, but that's just the way I try to do business. So I'm looking at this for Ant, and I don't mind maybe grabbing a PR, or honestly even a PRA. His assist line is at 5.5 at plus money, and we get PRA. There's 139.5. There's 239.5s in the market, both at DraftKings and at FanDuel. I don't mind either of those looks. I think that this is a good spot for Ant, looking at, the aggression that I anticipate him to play with, the minutes that he's going to play. He only had 26 PRA last game against Oklahoma City, but the 2 games prior he had 45 and 47. So I do think that there is a little bit of opportunity there for Ant. The biggest thing has been the scoring. He had 2 30-point games against Oklahoma City, and then that dipped again to 16. The rebounds have also dropped off a little bit, but the assists have remained relatively static with 6, 6, 3, 6, 6, and 6. So his potential assists also popped up to 10 last game. So I think there's definitely a little bit of opportunity there for Ant. But looking at what that changes in Ant's role, right? I think the player that is most likely to kind of get excised from the offensive process is Julius Randle. I think that those possessions, he's not somebody that's jacking up a ton of threes, and if he is, it's not a good thing for your offense. But he has struggled a little bit defensively in this series, and his facilitating hasn't been as good as it could have been so far. So given that, and given the offensive efficiency that Oklahoma City has, I think that you need some more guys that can not only generate good looks and generate like open shots and convert on those open shots, but you also need players that can hold up on the defensive side of the ball. So that brings us back to Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who, if you guys didn't know, is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's cousin. This is a funny joke for these people that have heard them just talk about this ad nauseum, right? So Nickeil Alexander-Walker has played 27, 25, 18, and 29 minutes so far in this series. And I like him to go. We bet this prop at 7.5. We bet it at 8, or we bet it at 7.5 twice, rather 7.5 and then 8+. And then now we're going to bet it again at 9.5. I just think his points prop is still too low. I think there's a little bit of an ability to bet over 1.5 threes as well, if you prefer to do that. Like if the juice gets a little crazy, or if this bumps up to maybe like a 10.5. But he scored 8, 17, 12, and 23 points. He gets plenty of those looks from beyond the arc, but I do hesitate to go directly and like only to the threes, just because he does get a couple of those layups. He is crashing the glass. He is an adept cutter. And he is somebody that will get out in transition and can get some of those looks too. So I like him to go over this 9.5 points line again. I wish there was an 8.5 still in the market based off of what he did last game, but there's a 9.5 at -102. So I am still seeing a pretty significant edge on that based off of projections and what the lines are. So I am going to grab Nickeil Alexander-Walker over 9.5 points. Looking at Oklahoma City, I was kind of considering the fact that it hasn't really felt like a great Hartenstein series. And part of that too is when we look at what Minnesota has been able to do, they've kind of neutralized the Chet Hartenstein lineups. And I think I heard a stat today, they're basically like a net zero, and they haven't been super effective. And with Minnesota kind of playing a little bit smaller, there's been fewer Rudy minutes, right? You're seeing a little bit more Naz Reid. You don't really need Isaiah Hartenstein out there on the floor as much. And he has continue to see his minutes kind of drop. In this series, he's had 19, 26, 19, and then down to 15 actually last game. And he's had 17, 16, 12, and 10 PRA. So I think you could look at a Hartenstein under 15 and a half PRA. I don't necessarily feel like the minutes are there, especially when you kind of look at the results when he's played alongside of Chet. It just hasn't been super effective. In large part, I think that when Rudy is in with those lineups, it makes it a little bit more difficult for them to keep the paint not only open, it's harder to draw Rudy out of the paint, it's harder to get him in some rotations, and there's only so much offense you can generate with that type of too big lineup. It's not like a guy like Cat who is could be a clear number one offensive option on a team. Chet isn't there yet. And Hartenstein, as good as he is as both a roller and as a rebounder, he is clogging the paint a little bit for Chet. And then that also clogs the paint for guys like SGA and Jalen Williams, et cetera, et cetera. So Hartenstein's minutes probably keep continuing to come down. And as a result, too, I do like Shay. I was looking at Shay. It feels chalky whenever you want to bet Shay, but Shay, his PA line is at 40.5. And I kind of want to bet it here. He had 50 last game against Minnesota. The only game that he really had a dud was the game that they got their doors blown off. He had 20 PA. The games prior, he had 46 and he had 40 PA against Minnesota. Part of why I like this prop, though, is with the idea that Hartenstein maybe plays a little bit less, I think that you can space the floor a little bit more, and you get the opportunity to get Shay into a little bit of space, within the 3-point line. Last game, we were on the over 1.5 threes, and in large part that had to do with the fact that Minnesota was going under screens for him. They were kind of giving him some space. And then I was listening to Zach Lowe, and he was kind of talking about how, which I thought was interesting, but he was talking about how they'll basically put a wing on Chet, or on Shay rather, and say okay, we kind of want you on the baseline, and he takes himself to the baseline. And then because of that, they're well, that's not really a great spot for you to be. And they'll kind of give him single coverage. And Shay is still so good offensively that he's going to cook that ass either way. And he's getting these little mid-range jumpers that he kind of tends to like. So I think it's been a good spot for Shay. I think that he's kind of figuring out what what Minnesota wants to do against him. And he's continued to, I think, improve as the series progresses. So he's coming off almost a series high 41% usage rate in game 4, and the potential assist popped. He converted on 10 of 15. The turnovers were also there, but he took 20 shots. He was 13 of 20 from the field, and he was able to get to the let's see, I think he was able to get to the free throw line pretty good. He was able to get to the free throw line. If I can get you this stat, it would be sick. Let's find it. He was 12 of 14 from the free throw line. And that honestly aligns with what he's been doing so far in the series. He was 11 for 14, 13 for 15, 4 for 4 in the dud game, and then 12 of 14 again in this last game. So I think there's plenty of opportunity for Shay. And I think that I am going to bet this over 40.5 PA. I think it's a great spot for him. There's plenty of potentials, and it's an opportunity for him to kind of put his stamp on this series and say, you know what? We are going to win this game. We are going to win this series, and we're going to go to the NBA Finals, and we're going to be done before everybody else. So I think that's a great spot for Shay. You can bet over 10.5 free throws attempted, and you can bet over 8.5 free throws made, which I think is a pretty strong play too, considering the fact that in the games that he's gone over, 11 for 14, 13 for 15, 12 for 14. So you can play either of those. You can play, I think the PA is a little bit safer for account health, but if you're not super worried about that, I don't mind the free throw bets either. I think at this point, we probably are going to see a Oklahoma City, Indiana finals. I mean, I think Oklahoma City is going to roll. We'll see. I think my Knicks fandom might have blinded me a little bit, but at the same time, I think that there were a lot of winnable games for New York in this series. So we'll just have to see kind of how it unfolds. I do want to talk about that account health thing, right? So there's been a lot of books that have offered more things during the playoffs, like more bets, more offerings. And those lines a lot of times are soft. We kind of take advantage of them from the futures perspective. And I like doing that because futures are generally not considered sharp. Like you can be sharp with futures, but books don't really look at your account the same way with futures. They, number one, depending on like if it's a full season future, they're kind of getting theirs anyway because they're holding your money for the course of the entire season. So that's a little bit valuable to them, right? If you're placing bets on these futures, a lot of it too is people inherently are throwing away money because people are hedging. People are betting against different spots that they already have. And you're essentially like reducing your expected value over the course of the season. So I think it's always like interesting when you bet in these like series futures, right? So we have the Ant rebounds leader that we did when we did the preview with Brandon, right? And it's 50-1. We've talked about like hedging it. And a lot of people have reached out about, do you hedge it? How do you hedge it? What do you do? I don't think that you can hedge it right now. I think it's too early. I think that even though I think Oklahoma City is able to close this in 5, maybe they don't. But the bet was basically that Ant could be the most consistent rebounder on these teams. He just had one down game, right? But it was that he was going to be consistent. It wasn't that he was going to be a guy that went out there and got 12 to 15 rebounds a game. Maybe you would see one game where there was a big spike. He got a double-double or triple-double where he had like 11, 12, maybe even 13 rebounds. But you were never looking at this as a situation where Ant was going to go out there and get like 14 rebounds a game. I think the hedge was when we bet it, we were like, well, we're going to play 6+ and we're going to play 8+. And, you know, we're also going to sprinkle on this rebound, the series rebounds leader. It's possible that he could be the series rebounds leader without getting the 8+, which would kind of suck a little bit, but still the 6+ seems to be relatively in play. Now, the reason I say this is when you look at it from a betting perspective, right? So we have Ant at 50-1. If you bet, let's say you bet a unit on it, right? Your expected return, if Ant wins, is 50 units or 51, shoot your stake back. Now, if you start betting against that position and like you start betting, I think you need to look at it from the perspective of how much exposure am I looking at in this market? And then what are my like expected odds or so to speak for winning? So right now you could bet Naz Reid at like 5-1 or Rudy Gobert at +160. And Ant has a 1 rebound lead on Naz and I think like a 2 rebound lead on Rudy. So if you start betting, let's say you bet now, you go, well, I'm going to bet Rudy for like 2 units. And I'm going to bet Naz for 2 units or like one, let's call it 1 unit because he's at higher odds. So now you're in the situation where if Ant wins, instead of winning 50, you win 50, you win 47 or so. So it's whatever, not the end of the world, right? But if Rudy wins and you bet 2 units on Rudy, I'd say, let's do +150 for ease of math. And you win 3 units, you're literally like back to where you started. You won 1 unit on the market. If you bet on Naz, he wins up 5, down 2, you're up 3 units. Great, that's fine. But at the same time, you kind of changed your exposure. You changed your position. You weakened your position to a degree because you started betting against it. And sometimes you can use a prior bet to leverage a future bet, but you almost need to think of the prior bet as part of your stake you really do need to think of your prior bet as part of your stake on the new bet. And it's like, okay, well, why am I betting against this thing that was 50-1 that I think my cap was really, really good on? What's the point? Because it's still possible that neither of those guys could win. Neither Naz nor Rudy could win. So I think that that's always something you kind of need to consider. And then from the perspective of like, let's say it wasn't 50-1. Let's say you had a smaller number. Let's say you had a number that was like 8-1, right? And you start betting all these other options. Sometimes like if you aren't really thinking through what your thought process is, you could wind up losing money on every situation. Every single way that this unfolds, you could lose money. And I think that people run into that when they're betting on futures. It's not necessarily through their own fault, but I mean it is, but you're not always thinking about it because the money's already there. Like it's already been inputted. So if you bet something and you're like, well, like I don't really think, this is going to be a good bet. Like I don't like how Like let's say you bet a lot on the Celtics and you were like, well, like I want to have a winner. I want to make sure that I get a winner. And you were like, okay, well, I'm going to bet on the Knicks now, for example. And then now because you said like, well, they beat the Celtics, they could win again. Or even if you bet it during that series, we said, well, if the Knicks beat the Celtics, then I'm going to like the Knicks against everybody. You start like increasing your exposure in a particular market, and I think that people kind of lose track of it. So they'll say, like, let's say they have like a rogue future, even on, let's say it's a preseason future in Oklahoma City and it was 7-1, and you start getting nervous about Oklahoma City's ability to beat these other teams, and you start to say like, well, like I'll throw a unit on Denver, I'll throw a unit on Minnesota, I'll throw a unit on the Celtics, I'll throw a unit on the Pacers. Next thing you know, that 7-1 ticket is basically like a 3-1. And, maybe that you had other positions. Maybe you had higher leverage on some of these other positions. Like, I don't know. But then because you already did that, now Oklahoma City's in the finals. And instead, you need to look at them and say, well, like I've already sunk, instead of 1 unit on the finals, I've already sunk like 5 units on the finals. And most of those are already out. So you basically have one 7-1 ticket that's for 1 unit, but you already lost 5. So if you're looking at it from the perspective of, oh, well, like I want to be able to make sure that I win money here, and I'm going to bet the Pacers for maybe a unit. It's like you're just bleeding into your profits. You're bleeding into these positions that were really strong at the time that you took them. You carried them throughout the course of the entire season, and then your math gets wrong. Your math gets wonky because you don't know, and like you aren't tracking properly like what your exposure is in the particular market. It's not so much that this team winning is going to be good for you or bad for you. Like that could be a winning bet. You could still also lose in the market. And I think that's one of the things that makes futures betting a little bit more difficult, because you're betting on things where there's a lot more variables because of the time. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong. Like if there's a star player that's hurt, you're like, well, that one's out the window. And it kind of changes your analysis on it. So you start looking at it, you go, well, that one's dead, but this one's alive. Like I'm rooting for Oklahoma City because I have a 7-1 ticket on them. And because you are doing it this way, and like you're processing it this way, it makes it harder to keep track of where you are. And there's this like tendency to want to lock in a win, or so to speak, but in reality, you might actually be locking in a loss because you're so concerned about taking a ticket to the counter that you didn't think about your overall exposure in whatever the situation is. So it's a long way of me to say you always need to make sure that your portfolio is right. And like you need to be looking at it from a bird's eye view. You can't lose the forest from the trees, right? And that's the most important thing with futures betting, even on these series and everything else. Like you need to make sure that you are keeping on top of your positions to the point where you go, well, like maybe this bet doesn't win, but at the same time, like I hit my threshold for this, or I didn't go below this loss point, or, I know that I'm going to leave this season up X amount of units because I didn't overexpose myself on any of these other markets. So that's the important thing with futures betting. And it's important to always keep a tally and like a tabulation on that throughout the course of the season. So that's my little diatribe for today. And it's another reason why I've always recommended, if you have free bets, I like to use them on futures, because it does let you cash a ticket at the end of the season where you don't have to lay cash on a bet that's going to be months down the road. And you can also then, it's a lot easier to use a free bet as leverage to then bet another futures position than it is to use cash, like real money, to then try to leverage something later. So I always recommend it, and I think it's one of the best uses of free bets that you could possibly have. Now for pods and recs, I am going to recommend, I made a fire this weekend, so that was nice. Just getting, get one of the logs. I will say, I do think that there's something to be said about like starting a fire, like legit, right? With maybe like you get some like newspapers or like twigs and like whatever, then you make a big fire. You know how much easier it is to take a Duraflame, like put it in with the rest of the logs and just light the Duraflame. Everything else just goes. It's great. So highly recommend that. And besides that, what do I want to recommend? You know what? It's summertime now, based on the fact that we're past Memorial Day. You can start wearing light suits. If you wear a suit to work, get a tan suit, man. It's the summer. You can wear a tan suit, be on your Obama shit. It's honestly, it's a pretty freeing experience. It feels funny like the first time you put on a tan suit, then you're like, this thing kind of fucks. Like, this is awesome. I get why people wear this. It does feel summery. So, you can get a tan, change your color palette a little bit, and, open yourself up to a couple more suiting options and clothing options because we are past Memorial Day. Start wearing white, wearing your pastels, call it a day. So be sure to do that as well. So again, this episode is brought to you by Rhythm, #1 AI betting tool in the market. The links are right down here. Be sure to like, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you want me to talk about. Let me know some of the questions that maybe you have for the NBA Finals coming up, and I'll try to start thinking about how to address those moving forward. But it's been a great episode. Appreciate you guys, and let's continue to cash that.